Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Dear students, welcome back to our sessions of the subject Business Ethics. Today's topic is about the job discrimination. Now, talking about the outcomes, the learning outcomes for today's topic, students should be capable to discuss and define the word discrimination. Students should also explain discrimination in employment. And students should be capable to discuss issues as to discrimination and culture. Another outcome here is explaining how to detect discrimination in different organizations. And then students should be capable to evaluate the ethical principles as to discrimination, explain some discriminatory practices held by companies, and finally students should be able to evaluate affirmative actions programs. Now, referring to these kind of outcomes, we have the following topics to go for. The first one is about the discrimination in employment, discrimination and culture, discrimination in institutions and companies, and then we talk about the ethics and discrimination. So another point would be then talking about the practices that can be done by companies, which is discriminatory practices, specifically in terms of hiring and human resource kind of policies. And finally, we end up with the affirmative action programs. Now, as we know that we have a lot of topics talking about discrimination all around the world. So a lot have been said about women, for example, and the minorities in big companies. Now, as we refer to the term discrimination, we know that more women and minorities still face discrimination. And this fact is not just about the third world or developing countries. This is one of the problems that even developed countries may still encounter in today's business. In that way, we found that more women and even minorities in multicultural countries are facing this problem. So they may receive fewer job offers, and if they may receive job offers, these kind of jobs are not actually of high ranking kind of position, less desirable jobs than white males, for example, talking about countries like America, systematically given less consideration in hiring, which is another problem that we may face even in Arab countries. In other countries where we find blacks and Hispanics are actually were offered jobs 15% fewer times than white males. So by this we have these indicators which emphasize this problem is actually still on the board. So what do we mean by discrimination? The word discrimination by itself is not actually bad. It means classifying people into categories. This is the word discrimination. So discrimination in its root meaning is not at all wrong. It's about distinguishing. That is why we have a verse in the Holy Quran, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. So this is the point. But it can be wrong as it is used in a wrongful discrimination. So here, distinguishing among people on the basis of prejudice and instead of individual merit. Here, it becomes wrong. But actually, the word discrimination is about classifying people into different categories: male, female, regarding gender, regarding the countries, the religion, etc. However, when these kind of classification are used on basis of prejudice, not on basis of what people can do, this becomes wrong. This is what we mean by wrongful discrimination. In that sense, we may need to discuss more about discrimination in employment. So discrimination in employment involves three basic elements. These are the elements that we may find in corporations as you talk about discrimination. For example, if you have discrimination in companies, then it must be a decision not based on individual merit. what we mean by individual merit is actually what the individual, the employment in this case, can do. For example, qualifications, skills, capability, competence. So any decision that is not based on these things means that we have discrimination. For example, instead of dealing with customers regarding these good qualifications or features, we refer to or we deal with employments regarding their color, religion, for example, country, nation, ideology, etc. So this is what we refer to as discrimination in employment. Second, the decision must derive from racial or sexual prejudice. So any kind of decision as to employment which is not actually based on merit and can also be more about racial or sexual prejudice is an example of discrimination in employment. Third, the decision must have harmful impact on the interests of employees. And this is an inevitable result of such kind of practice. So not dealing as to individual merit is actually harming the employees, especially talking about high performers. Now we have discrimination and culture. Sometimes the way people act in a company is a result of the culture itself. So an act may be part of the isolated behavior of a single individual who intentionally discriminates based on personal prejudice. You see, this is the first level. Discrimination can be the result of someone's perception about how employees should be treated. This can be the manager. Or it can be an act which can be part of the routine and institutionalized behavior of group. Not only an individual, we have group of people within the company itself sharing the same false value about employees or about how employees should be treated. And the third one is even worse. An act may be part of the isolated behavior of a single individual due to uncritically adopting the practices and stereotypes of his or her society. Now we're no longer talking about one or group, rather we're talking about the whole society. So this individual is actually copying what others are doing in the society, to the extent that such wrong practices are becoming something normal. And this is the worst scenario that can happen and may affect discrimination, may affect the relationship between managers and employees. So in that sense, discrimination and culture can be a systematic routine of group that unintentionally discriminates, which is a big problem as a reflection of what happens in the society, which can be also mirrored into companies. This can be an indication of discrimination exists when certain groups members hold less desirable positions than others. For example, in the United States in the 60s, at that time, it was normal for employees, black people, to hold less desirable jobs down the hierarchy of the organization, to the extent that any one of those black people holding a high position becomes something weird in the society, something strange. And this is one of the issues as to culture. Now, to go more specific, we have discrimination in institutions, in companies. In that sense, we may need to ask ourselves whether a company is actually discriminating their employees. To answer this question, we can make three types of comparisons to provide evidence of this type, referring to discrimination in these companies. For example, if we compare the average benefit given to various groups. So for example, in a company where we have different people, black, for example, white, woman, men, people of different ideologies. So we compare among those people regarding the benefits that they get. And if we have differences, and such kind of differences are actually more regarding this kind of feature, then we may say there is discrimination in that company. Besides, the proportion of a group found in the lowest levels of an institution. For example, are they all black people? Are they all women? Etc. Are they all Muslims, non-Muslim, for example, outside, and the like. The last one, the proportion of a group found in the most advantageous positions in the institutions, high-ranking positions or top management. So by comparing the portion of those people holding these advantageous positions to the places down the levels, we may have an idea whether the company is actually discriminating employees or not. Now, as we talked about discrimination, we need to refer to our principles, the ethical principles, equality, rights, and justice. So, arguments against discrimination fall into three groups: egalitarian arguments, rights arguments, and justice arguments. If you take the first one, utilitarianism, how can discrimination be against utilitarianism? So we have the following. The utilitarian argument maintains that the society's productivity will be highest when jobs are awarded based on competence or merit, not the otherwise. For example, if we have, the top management in a company is actually hired based on his competencies and skills, the overall productivity of the company will be higher and the whole society will get benefit. But if this person was actually hired for some kind of considerations, like for example, considering the color, religion, ideology, whatsoever, decisions made by this manager will not be effective and efficient. So efficiency will not be attained and the productivity of the society will be less. So discrimination based on anything else is inefficient and therefore counter to utility, which is based on maximum benefit given to the whole society. Now regarding the rights arguments, which is the second principles of ethics, it is considered to be wrong because it violates people's basic human rights. Every single individual must be treated alike, the same way that the others are treated, considering the recommended kind of features, requirements by the company itself. So Kant, for example, says that humans should be treated as ends, not as means to ends. So according to Kant, employees should be looked at what they do, what they can do actually, not how they look like or where they come from. And that means here, in that sense, we have discrimination is wrong, of course, because it violates people's right to be treated as equals. Once an individual, for example, A, can do exactly like B, so both must have equal opportunity as for job offers or even promotions. Now regarding justice arguments, it is of course unjust arbitrarily to give some people more opportunity than the others. So here, people should not be treated differently simply because they differ in other non-relevant respects. So this is regarding justice. Employees must be dealt with fairly according to their own capabilities and competence. Now we have some kind of discriminatory practices that we can find in companies. Some of these practices that can be made or done by companies is about recruitment practices that rely on the word of mouth referrals. Now, for example, in a company, someone might be recommended to get the job, and he or she may actually get the job based on such kind of reference. This referral is actually affecting the other individuals who can be even better in terms of doing the job. So this can be found especially in countries like Yemen, unfortunately, and other underdeveloping countries, where jobs actually are not designed properly, they're not analyzed, and the way people are accepted in jobs is not based on systematic approach. Another discriminatory practice is the screening practices. Some companies may include qualifications not relevant to a job. They may do this one to offer less money, or we say they may avoid good workers so that to cut down on cost, which is one of the discriminatory practices found by many companies. Promotion practices that are not actually based on merit, rather based on other issues, like, for example, maybe gender, maybe religion, maybe color, nationality, etc. Conditions of employment that do not award equal wages and salaries. So people working in different places, different conditions, should be awarded according to that kind of place or plant or subsidiary. And that if people are treated in a way that are not based on these conditions, then we have a problem in terms of the conditions of employment. Finally, discharging an employee based on race or gender. This is another issue that company may not really want to do. Some companies may have to discharge some of its employees, to lay off part of the employees, maybe because of financial crisis, or the company is no longer able to sell more products, or economic recession. So whatsoever the reason why companies discharge employees should actually be based on real and solid reasons, other than race, gender, or any other non-relevant job kind of features. Now we have some affirmative action programs made by companies to avoid these kind of problems. Here, affirmative action programs call for positive steps designed to eliminate the effects of past discrimination. This is especially seen in government kind of organization, legally required for all firms holding government contracts. So a government that deals with, for example, corporations for whatsoever kind of business may impose these kind of actions or affirmative actions. Affirmative action programs begin with a detailed study. First, utilization analysis, referred to as utilization analysis, of the major job classifications in an organization. In this kind of study, they would like to know the kind of requirements, job details of compensable factors of every single job, requirements of competencies. So when they compare jobs to other kinds of jobs, they have these solid backgrounds, and that they may not fall in problems. The analysis is designed to discover whether there are fewer minorities or women in a particular job classification. And if it's justified that we have, for example, a bigger portion of white male dominating high places. Some other times, as you said before, this analysis can help companies to justify why they're hiring employees that way. Other than that, the company may take some kind of actions to correct these problems. So, if the analysis shows that women or minorities are underutilized in terms of opportunities to get jobs or even better jobs, then the firm must establish practices to correct these deficiencies in their own policies. So by this, dear students, we come to the end of our topics in which we define the word discrimination. We explain discrimination in employment. We identify different concepts referring to discrimination in cultural context. We explain how discrimination is detected in institutions. We also evaluated ethics as to discrimination. We explained some discriminatory practices. And finally, we discussed and evaluated the needed affirmative action programs. You have an assignment attached to this subject, so students should go and address these different questions in terms of theories first developed and in terms of the students' point of view regarding different contexts and cultural heterogeneity. Finally, thank you very much for listening to us. See you inshallah next week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.